Gonzaga sleepwalked their way through a win over San Diego on Wednesday evening thanks to an incredibly unique performance from Graham Ike.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday. Welcome in to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. And new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, we're spending the second and third segment of today's show getting you ready for Gonzaga's big-time game on Saturday night against the Cougars of Washington State. This will be our final episode of the week, so we're getting you ready for that exciting one. We do want to start the show talking about Gonzaga's rather listless performance on Wednesday at a very quiet McCarthy Athletic Center against the Toreros of San Diego. Gonzaga wins 93-80. The final score is not super representative. The Zags were up 18-20 for most of the last few minutes of the second half. Joe Few comes in, gets a couple turnovers. San Diego hits a few shots. It ends up being a 13-point win, but while on one level, that's not super indicative of the score in the sense that Gonzaga was seemingly up 18 or 20, they also didn't play very well in this game. And so it was kind of that type of performance that we've seen all too often from the Zags this year. We did find out right before the game that neither Michael Ajayi or Jun Suk-yo would be suiting up for Gonzaga due to illness. And after watching the first half of this game and really throughout the entire game, kind of started to wonder if there was other players maybe dealing with similar illness issues because there was just very, very little energy in the building on Wednesday. The Zags were just kind of going through the motions in this one in a rather frustrating way. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't some great things to see in this one. Before we get to the good and bad, I want to give a shout out to Colby Brooks, who not only is playing for San Diego, he drew the start for Steve Lavin's team. Brooks spent 3 years at Gonzaga as a walk-on before hitting the transfer portal this offseason, goes to San Diego, started this game, finished the game with 4 points, 3 boards on 2 of 4 shooting. Nice to see Colby getting some run for the Toreros. I teased it in the beginning. The most unique part of this game was absolutely Graham Ike, who finished the game with a tremendous line, 15 points, 19 rebounds, but he was 1 of 5 from the field. He didn't make his first field goal until very late in the game. So for a while, he'd already accrued a double-double without having made a single field goal. It was a very bizarre game from Graham. Basically, every time he touched the ball, he got fouled before he could even get close to getting a shot up at the rim. So only 5 field goal attempts. 2 of them were three-pointers. So he was 1 of 3 on 2-pointers and yet finishes this game with 15 points and 19 rebounds. The 19 boards is the most for a Zag in a game since Joel Ayayi back against Iowa in that 2020-21 season. The main thing for Graham, 13 of 15 from the free throw line. That is phenomenal. Great. We've talked so much recently about Graham's ability to get to the free throw line and convert at the line. You cannot ask for more for him in this game. 13 points all coming from the free throw line. Really good stuff from him. And then big shout out Ben Gregg. We talked about Ben having a good game last year against San Diego, and he did it again this year. 23 points for him, 9 of 12 shooting, 3 of 3 from the three-point line. That is massive for Ben. Last year, this game really got him going in the second half of the year. We know that the struggles for Ben from beyond the arc have been a oft-discussed issue for him and the Zags this year. To see him knock down all 3 of his three-point attempts was much, much needed for the Zags. Khalif Battle had 20 points, 6 boards, 4 of 9 from 3. The Zags, as a team, we talked about Graham Ike, 13 of 15 from the line. The Zags, 27 of 33. That's 82%. To take 33 free throws in a game and improve on your 80.8% free throw percentage on the year is tremendous for the Zags. Good on them for that. Also, a dominant game on the glass. Again, Graham, lots to do with that. 48-31, the advantage for the Zags. They had 15 offensive boards. Not so good stuff. We already talked about this. It was just a low-energy game. Not a lot of effort, not a lot of energy. You could just kind of feel it. You could see it. The broadcasters were talking about it. There's no student section because the students aren't in session yet. So you just didn't feel any energy in this building. And it really stood out throughout the contest. San Diego hit some big shots. KJ Bradley had a phenomenal game for the Toreros off the bench, hit a bunch of threes early in the game. Didn't play as well in the second half, but the team just didn't look great. They play like this against the top half of the WCC. It's probably a bit of a different result, either a very, very close win or perhaps not even a win for this team. San Diego's 7 of 20 from three in the first half, only 4 of 13 in the second half, but still too many made threes for the Toreros in this one. Zags committed a lot of fouls. They had 6 fouls in the first 4 minutes of the second half, just kind of lethargic stuff from the team. Nolan Hickman, 5 points, 2 of 10 shooting for him. That included 1 of 7 from three and a pair of turnovers. Scored the first points of the game on a wide open three, scored the last points of the first half. Did not score in any other point in the first half and did not score at all in the second half. Just did not look particularly, he didn't look good. Just didn't look good in this game. Was missing shots, had some bad shot attempts, just kind of a frustrating game from him. The whole team as a three-point shooting team, not good in this one. 10 of 31, which is not terrible, 32%, but Ben Gregg and Khalif Battle combined to go 7 of 12. The rest of the team, 3 of 19. That included Hickman's 1 of 7, Stromer was 1 of 5, Nemhard was 1 of 4, Ike 0 of 2, led to the Zags not having a particularly great day, but they still scored 93 points. They gave up 80. Some of them were really contested shots by San Diego, but ultimately not the strongest performance from the Zags here, but a win is a win, and now they move on to opportunity to take on David Riley and Washington State on Saturday. It begins a stretch of 5 out of 6 games being at the quad 1 or quad 2 level for Mark Few's club. Let's meet that Washington State team coming up here in just a second. The first, folks, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's kind of like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 per year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Looking ahead, getting ready for Saturday's big-time game for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, taking on David Riley and the Washington State Cougars, the first matchup between Gonzaga and Washington State in nearly a decade, and, of course, the first time these two teams are squaring off as members of the WCC, with Washington State joining the conference temporarily as alongside Oregon State. Of course, those two teams will remain in the same conference with Gonzaga when they all move, in the case of Oregon State and Washington State, back to the Pac-12, for Gonzaga joining the Pac-12 starting in 2026. The game is scheduled for 6 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, January 11th. The game will be on ESPN Plus. Outside of the region, it'll be on KHQ in the Spokane media market, and then on Fox 13 Plus for those of you in the Seattle area. Like we said, first game between these two teams since 2015. That was when Gonzaga officially canceled the home-and-home series that had been going on between Gonzaga and Washington State for a very long time. The reports were that Gonzaga basically didn't feel they were getting enough out of this game. I don't know how truthful that is, whether there was direct quotes from that, whether it was kind of just a hearsay thing. Certainly Washington State has not been a historically particularly great men's basketball program. They have been better the last couple of years. They had a really nice peak, kind of not quite at the end of Gonzaga and Washington State playing each other, a little bit farther back in the 2007, 2008 range, when they had some guy named Klay Thompson, who turns out ended up being pretty darn good at the NBA level. The all-time series is heavily in favor of Washington State just because of how long these two teams have been playing each other. Wazoo has 98 wins compared to just 51 for Gonzaga. That most of those wins have come in the much more recent past for the Zags. They including winning 6 of the most recent 7 games between these two teams between 2008 and 2015. This game is also the first non-quad 3 or quad 4 game for Gonzaga since they played UCLA back on December 28th. A decently long stretch starting conference play where they were playing some of the not as good teams in the conference. And yet now, one of the nice things about having Wazoo in the conference and Oregon State and seeing some strong seasons from some of the other teams in league play is that while that streak is now over, Gonzaga starts a new stretch where they're going to play 5 of their next 6 games are currently either quad 1 or quad 2 games. We talked about this earlier this week. Gonzaga has 10, as of right now, 10 remaining games that are either quad 1 or quad 2, all in conference play. The significantly more quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities for Gonzaga is a huge boost for a team that hasn't picked up as many marquee wins as they certainly would have liked to. They do already have 2 quad 1 wins, so it's not like they are in dire straits. Last year at this time, they did not have any, so to already be in a better position in that space is great for Gonzaga, but they lost all 4 games they played against currently ranked teams, and with UCLA struggling the last few weeks, I should say, that's not helping Gonzaga's case, and Arizona just stomped all over West Virginia, which is not helping their case. I suspect both those teams will not be ranked by next week as well. I'll look at these five of the next 6 games for Gonzaga. Wazoo, of course, on Saturday. That's currently a quad 2 game. They play at Oregon State next week. That is a quad 1 game. I'll be in the house for that one, by the way, for anybody going to Gill Coliseum in Corvallis. They play Santa Clara at home. That's quad 2. Then they got their 1 quad 4 game in the mix. That's on the road at Portland. I'm also going to be at that game. Then they play Oregon State at home for quad 2, and then at St. Mary's in Moraga. That is a quad 1 game. So for Gonzaga, from now until the early part of February, lots and lots of very big opportunities to pick up marquee games again. Not a ton of quad 1 in this specific group. That or at Oregon State game. We will see if Oregon State maintains being in the top 75 for that to remain a quad 1 game. I frankly wouldn't be shocked if they end up in the quad 2 territory when all is said and done, but it's it's not going to drop to quad 3. It's going to be a quad 2 game. So that'll still be a good win for Gonzaga, even if it doesn't stay quad 1 at St. Mary's should, barring a collapse from the Gales, remain a quad 1 game for them. We'll talk about those games when we get there, but for now, let's talk about this Washington State team. This is being recorded prior to Wazoo's game against Pacific, which is on Thursday, January 9th. Many of you are listening to this before that game comes out, but for those of you listening Friday or Saturday, just wanted to throw the caveat out there that we do not have the results of that game at this point. Wazoo 13-3 on the year. They are a perfect 3-0 to start conference play alongside Gonzaga and St. Mary's. 16-point win over Portland. Not a super inspiring game there. It was a road game, but the Pilots don't typically have a strong road or home presence. They also only beat LMU by 14. I guess I shouldn't say only. That's not a bad win against a decent LMU team. They beat San Francisco by 9. That win over the Dons kind of keeps Washington State's, what I would consider at this point, razor thin at-large hopes alive. I felt like that was a game that as much as there can be a bracket buster in early January, that kind of felt like it, where San Francisco losing that game puts themselves in a position where it's probably WCC tournament championship or bust in terms of making the big dance. For Wazoo, probably in that position as well. Again, for both teams, if the planets align, they sweep Gonzaga, sweep St. Mary's, lose the championship game in the WCC tournament. Maybe they sneak in that way, but at this point, that looks fairly unlikely. Wazoo 65th at the net as we are recording this currently. This is a quad 2 game as long as they stay in the top 75. So they're kind of hanging on to that spot. Of course, losing to Gonzaga will probably hurt them in the net, not dramatically. Certainly a loss to Gonzaga at home is not going to hurt them too much. But for Wazoo, any future losses, if they do drop any games to teams they should not drop, if you're listening to this and they already lost to Pacific, for example, that's game may already be outside of that quad 1 conversation, or excuse me, be outside of that conversation and potentially drop him to quad 3 instead of quad 2. For the Cougars right now, 1-1 in quad 1 games, with the win being Nevada, the loss being SMU. 4-2 in quad 2 with wins over Bradley, Boise State, Northern Iowa, and then San Francisco. Their losses being to Iowa and UW. That's their worst loss right now, but it's a rivalry game, so I don't know if it'll be held against them too much. 2-0 in quad 3, 6-0 in quad 4. Ken Pom kind of has them pretty close to where they are in the net ranking, 71st. Adjusted offensive efficiency of 90th, adjusted defense at 73rd, tempo is 28th. We're going to talk about that more to close out the show. But want to talk about some of the main storylines for Wazoo, the chief one being This team is a new roster, new coach. David Riley comes over from Eastern Washington. He brings a handful of his best players from that Eagles team with him to Wazoo. Super new look roster after Kyle Smith took the head coach job at Stanford. But the big storyline in the season has been a handful of season ending or long-term injuries for this team. And the fact that that hasn't really impacted them at the level you would have thought. Cedric Coward is the best player on this roster. Hands down. He is extremely talented. He was a likely NBA draft pick, or at least he still could be, but he was trending towards being a potential second-round pick this year. Through 6 games, Coward was averaging just under 18 points, about 7 boards, a little under 4 assists, and about 2 blocks per game. But he suffered a season-ending injury. He's been out since November 21st. Isaiah Watts, who is one of the very few returners on this roster, played 12 games, averaged 12.5 points, 4.5 boards, 2 assists, shooting 40% from 3. But he's been out since December 18th. Reports are that he's going to be out several weeks. So we're at about the 3-week mark as of right now. I have not heard if he's going to play for this Gonzaga game. My guess is no, but it's possible that that is the game that he ends up trying to make a return for. Team also lost freshman Marcus Williams after 4 games and Rihards Vivers after 2 games. Those 2 are both done for the year. So 4 key injuries for this team, and yet they remain great. They've played very, very well. They're undefeated in conference play. They don't have any super bad losses outside of UW. And it's because they're one of the most efficient offensive teams in the country. Now, they have some flaws offensively, but in terms of putting the ball in the net, they're pretty darn good at that. Field goal percentage is 57.2. That's 19th in the country. They shoot 36.3% from 3. They make about 9 of them per game. That's fantastic. They shoot 59.3% on 2-pointers. That is 16th in the country. Super high field goal percentage, efficient from 3, efficient from 2. The reason that their offense is not as highly regarded as it could be is because they also turn the ball over a lot. 15.2 turnovers per game. That is the 19th worst mark in college basketball. Their turnover rate per KenPom is 20.8%. That is 329th. Like I said, literally turn the ball over more than the vast majority of teams in college basketball. And it's not just from the other team getting steals. Their non-steal turnover rate is 10.3%. That's 348th. This effectively means that there are very few teams in college basketball more likely to cause themselves to turn the basketball over than Wazoo. Whether it's a shot clock violation, traveling, stepping out of bounds, offensive fouls, various different ways you can commit non-steal turnovers. Wazoo, pretty darn good at doing all of them. That is what is hurting this team from being at the ceiling that they could potentially be at offensively. So names to know for this team, since we've focused primarily on the players who are not healthy for this team at this point. UW transfer guard Nate Calmise has been their best player this year, 16.5 points per game, 4.3 boards, 4.3 assists, 3.5 boards, and 1.8 steals per game. Very efficient, score around the rim, about 58%, despite being a relatively small guard. He is not a great three-point shooter, only 27% there. Then we have the trio of Eastern Washington transfers. Cedric Coward is also among them, but we're not counting him since he is not healthy at the moment. That would be Lawan Watts, Dane Erickstrup, and Ethan Price. And one of the things that's really tough about this Washington State team is how balanced they are. Watts is averaging 13.6 points. Erickstrup is averaging 12.6 points. Price is averaging 11.9 points. So you have all 3 of those guys within 1.5 points of each other. Calmise is only a few points ahead of them. And that's without Cedric Coward, who is averaging 17 a game. Again, this team can beat you a lot of different ways. A lot of different guys can get hot. Watts is a great rebounder, also averages 4 assists per game, 35% three-point shooter. Erickstrup averages 1.2 blocks and 1 steal. Very good defender. Also 41% three-point shooter on 5.5 attempts per game. And then Ethan Price, 2.4 assists, efficient shooter, 63%, 36% from 3. Last name I'll toss out there. Andy Okafor, transfer from Cal, only averaging 5.4 points and 2.5 boards per game as one of their bigs, but he is averaging 1.6 blocks, and all of that comes in just 15 minutes per game. A big-bodied guy that the Cougars are almost certainly going to throw at Graham Ike and Braden Huff as long as they can. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about tempo. We're going to talk about turnovers. All of that going to be among the biggest keys for Gonzaga to handle this Washington State team on Saturday. All that and more coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're closing out the show and the week. There won't be a show on Friday. This is it for Locked On Zags this week, closing it out with our 5 keys to a Gonzaga victory on Saturday and a long awaited rivalry game against Washington State. Not only the first time they're playing each other in a decade, but a sign of things to come, as these two teams are now going to play each other a couple of times a year indefinitely as they remain in the WCC together until they both jump back in Wazoo's case to the Pac-12 starting in the 26-27 season. Key number 1, the tempo of this game. Gonzaga needs to set the tempo, and that's an interesting thing because they don't play a lot of teams that like to play faster than them. Most teams attempt to slow Gonzaga down. It is the Randy Bennett strategy. It has worked very effectively at St. Mary's for a long time. It is what Mick Cronin and UCLA has done against Gonzaga. Even Mark Pope at BYU and Kentucky, while they typically play fast, they tend to work hard to slow Gonzaga down. I don't know exactly what David Riley is going to do. We have to see how he's never coached against Gonzaga. So even if you look at previous games and what they've done against other teams, you kind of got to throw that out here in a different matchup for this team. I'm curious if they're going to try to run with Gonzaga. Teams that try to run with Gonzaga rarely succeed. It is not typically a good recipe for success for opposing teams, especially when Gonzaga is at home, to try to run with them. But this team plays at a much quicker tempo than Gonzaga this season. So maybe they will try to make Gonzaga run with them. Again, knowing that Wazoo has 4 players on the shelf with injuries, perhaps they won't want to run with a team that has more depth than they do. It seems like it would be a difficult strategy for Wazoo to be able to keep up with. Not that they don't have the athletes, they do, or even the talent. This is a team that has a lot of depth. So it'll be interesting to see if that's what they kind of try to do, or if they try to slow Gonzaga down, just give up on getting offensive rebounds, fly back, and prevent Gonzaga from getting out in transition while trying to run themselves. That's a viable strategy, but if you got to think that you have the players who can withstand doing that for a full 40 minutes, because Gonzaga will grind you down, wear you out, and then beat you in the final 10 minutes if you don't have the athletes to hang with them for that amount of time. Key number 2 for Gonzaga, score a bunch of points off turnovers. You got to capitalize on Wazoo's mistakes because they're going to turn the basketball over. They do it 15.5 times per game. That is a lot. And they turn it over, and they're playing on the road. They're playing on a shorter break than Gonzaga. This is a team that's going to turn the basketball over. For Gonzaga, it's not just generating steals. It's playing hard-nosed defense, forcing them into shot clock violations, forcing them into making entry passes that aren't there, or trying to anticipate them swinging the ball around the key, or any type of thing you can do. And you can't force a player to travel necessarily, but if you're playing good, tough defense, you're in their face, you're overwhelming them, that's going to make them more likely to make mistakes. But the main thing is not generating the turnovers as much as it is capitalizing on them. Go on a 6-0 run or an 8-0 run or a 10-0 run or 12-2, 15-2, whatever it may be, because 3 out of 4 possessions down the floor, one time you got a steal and a breakaway dunk and you got the crowd all pumped up. The next time down, you forced a shot clock violation. The next time down, they missed a shot. The next time down, they threw the ball out of bounds. And now Coach Riley's got to call a timeout because you scored 8 in a row. If you have all those possessions, but you only score once, they're not, that's not going. This team plays at such a quick tempo. They get so many possessions. There's going to be so many different possessions between Gonzaga and Wazoo in this game that if you don't take advantage of the mistakes that they make, this team, who is highly efficient, if they get the ball up, if it's out of their hands, it goes in more than most other teams in the country. That is what this team is good at. That is what the data indicates, is that they are making more shots at a higher clip than most of the teams in college basketball. Don't let them get those shots up. And when they don't, when they make mistakes, whether it's a live ball turnover, in which case you should be getting out in transition and scoring hopefully easily, or a dead ball turnover, take advantage. I want the points off turnovers numbers to be overwhelmingly in favor of Gonzaga. And I can almost promise you that specific data point will give us a very strong indication of who won this basketball game. Key number 3, we've mentioned this one a handful of times, and I think it's pretty significant for this matchup in particular. Get Washington State's bigs in foul trouble and convert at the line. Converting at the free throw line, that hasn't been a problem for Gonzaga this year. They're shooting 80.8% from the free throw line. That's 7th in the country. They're getting to the line. They're making their free throws. Point blank, that has not been a problem. Knock on wood here in case I jinx them, but that has not been an issue for the Zags this year. Washington State generates a lot of shots blocked. Their block rate on the season is 14.2%. That's the 29th best in the country. They average about 5.5 blocks per game, which is top 20 in the country. Now, having said that, Cedric Coward has only played 6 games this year. He averaged 1.7 blocks per game in those 6 games. So even in a small sample size, his data points are kind of inflating Wazoo's block numbers in a way that, they're not quite that good without him in the mix. But the main thing for these Wazoo bigs, they commit a lot of fouls. Okafor averages 2.2 fouls per game. And again, as I mentioned in the second segment there, he only plays 15 minutes per game. Over a 40-minute game, he averages about 6 fouls. Dane Erikstrup, their other big, 3.9 fouls per game in about 27 minutes. So he's averaging about 4 fouls a game, and he's 27 minutes is full-time starters minutes, but 4 fouls a game. That is not great. And for Gonzaga, they get to the free throw line a lot. They've been very, very good in that space, much better than they were last year, in a large part due to significant improvements for Graham Ike in that space. Graham Ike is averaging just under 5 free throw attempts per game. That's massive. He's not only averaging 5 free throw attempts per game, he's converting them 76% of the time. Ben Gregg is second on the team, 3.6 free throw attempts per game. He's second on the team. He's until recently not been starting for this team. And Gregg shooting 79% from the free throw line. Not just the bigs. Braden Huff has not been a free throw shooter. Mike Lejayi, both of those guys are under 2 free throw attempts per game. Huff's only averaging about 1 free throw attempt per game. That is a massive difference between Ike and Huff. Statistically this year is how much more Graham Ike gets to the free throw line almost 5 times as often as Braden Huff. Just putting that out there as a key stat for the impact that Ike has on this team. And frankly, Ike doing that as often as he does is helping Braden Huff, because Huff gets a chance to convert against the other team's backup centers a lot of the time, or their starting center who already has 2 or 3 fouls and is playing a little bit more conservatively. But outside of the bigs, great game for Khalif Battle to get to the line. Great game for other Gonzaga guards, Ryan Nembhard to get to the free throw line. Battle, this has always been an elite part of his game, but he's only averaging 3.3 free throw attempts per game this year. Last year at Arkansas, 6.7. He's almost half the free throw attempts per game this year. He was over 4 free throw attempts per game every single year of his career at Temple. So he is not nearly the foul merchant that he was at previous stops. I think we're going to start to see that continue to grow as part of his game going forward. This would be a great chance for him to pick up a ton of fouls on the opposing team and convert at the stripe. 2 more keys, and this one kind of goes together with that last one. Don't fall in love with the 3-point shot. Wazoo holds opponents to about 30% from beyond the arc. That's 92nd in the country. They are a good 3-point defensive team. The Zags are shooting about 35% from 3. That's fine. They're about average. The Zags are basically an average 3-point shooting team, whereas Wazoo is a slightly above average team defending the 3-point line. Meanwhile, Wazoo allows opponents to shoot 50% on 2-pointers, which is basically exactly average, whereas Gonzaga averages 57% on 2-pointers, which is almost top 50 in the country. This is a game where Gonzaga should not settle for outside shots. That is true of almost every game for Gonzaga. We've seen that where some teams really pack it in and kind of force Gonzaga to outshoot them. Portland does that. Gonzaga typically beats Portland by shooting a bunch of threes, but this is not a game where you want to do that. And I think David Riley is a very good coach, and I think that one of their big strategies is going to be to try to make Gonzaga settle for threes. Whether that's them utilizing a zone defense, which I could absolutely see based on them not wanting to let Gonzaga get out in transition, based on them not wanting Gonzaga to be able to run that pick and roll and get Graham Ike open around the rim, based on not wanting their bigs to get in foul trouble. I think there's a lot of things that point to Wazoo potentially utilizing a zone defense in this game. Riley's a smart coach. He's going to watch the tape. He's going to see that Gonzaga struggled against the zone. He knows that Gonzaga is a better 2-point scoring team than 3-point scoring team. He knows that his defense is good, does a good job of defending the 3-point line. So that's what they should try to do if they're Wazoo. For Gonzaga, do not let them do that comfortably. Key number 5, we kind of touched on it a little bit with Battle in that third key as well. Get the guards more involved in the offense. We've been talking about this for the last few weeks. We started talking about it kind of right as the new year hit with our resolutions for Coach Few of after that Pepperdine game where we kind of saw Gonzaga's offense fall apart more or less because Ryan Nembhard had a bad game. And that kind of was a catalyst for Gonzaga realizing we need to have more versatility in our offense. And part of that is getting Khalif Battle more involved, getting Dusty Stromer more involved, getting Nolan Hickman more involved. This would be a strong game to continue that, their first chance to really let those guys cook a little bit more against a quality opponent. It's great to see Khalif Battle dominate against LMU. It's great to see Dusty Stromer hit a bunch of shots against Portland. But again, how does that look against a team that is much better in this Washington State club? Battle's 10-plus field goal attempts in each of his past 3 games. He had been under that in 5 of the last 6 previously. That is a very intentional change in Gonzaga's offense to have Khalif Battle taking more shots. Dusty Stromer, 8 2-point attempts in the past 3 games combined. He had 8 field goal attempts, 2-point attempts in the previous 5 games combined prior to that. So a much more field goal attempts for Dusty inside the 3-point line. He had just 10 2-point attempts total in the first 7 games of the season. So again, you break the year up into thirds, with these last 3 games being a much more prominent attempt by Dusty to take those 2-point shots. He's also taken 5 free throw attempts in the past 3 games. He had 10 total in the first 13 games this season. He's more aggressive getting to the rim, more aggressive looking for his shots. The Zags cannot just rely on Nembhard and the bigs, especially against this team. Want to avoid too many 3-point attempts. I think a key to doing that is to let Battle and Dusty do more with the basketball in their hands as playmakers instead of just floating around the perimeter and looking for open shots. I don't think that's the strategy against this Wazoo team. It's going to wrap it up for me today and for this week here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'm very excited about this Wazoo game. It's so great to have this rivalry back in action. We're going to recap this game for you all on Monday, get you ready for those games coming up that week against Oregon State. That's the big one in the middle of the week next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. Really excited about this matchup. Thanks again for listening, folks. Have a fantastic weekend. And of course, as always, go Zags.